Welcome to today's Explainer. Honestly, as a consumer protection lawyer, I have been incredibly excited to get into this one. We're examining a truly fascinating case study in deceptive marketing. We're going to travel all the way back to 1989 to unpack the absolute anatomy of a lawsuit, where a 9-year-old kid didn't just accept a terribly disappointing purchase. No, he took the corporate Goliath, Nintendo of America, straight to federal court.
So, at the absolute heart of this David-versus-Goliath courtroom drama is one incredibly complex legal question. Is deceptive box art actually illegal? I mean, in the golden age of gaming, buying a cartridge was essentially a massive gamble based entirely on a piece of painted cardboard. But when exactly does that packaging cross the line from, clever marketing puffery into a direct violation of federal trade laws? Well, that's exactly the case we're litigating today.
Okay, let's dive into our docket for today. We'll be looking at the incident, suing the gaming Goliath, the merits of the legal claim, the corporate defense strategy, why the court dismissed the case, and finally, modern storefront standards.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the incident and the deceptive packaging.
Let me set the scene for you. It's October 1989 in Westport, Connecticut. A father named Nick Thiemann takes his 9-year-old son, Clark, to the local Child World toy store. Now, Clark had been working his absolute tail off for this trip. He'd spent months diligently collecting discarded soda cans and glass bottles from local athletic fields, saving every single penny. In consumer protection law, we always look for the specific injury to the consumer. And here, that injury was the $39.99, which, by the way, is nearly $100 in today's money, that Clark handed over for a game published by LGN, simply titled Major League Baseball. Now, what's really interesting here is the stark, undeniable contrast between the corporate promise and the actual software reality. On one hand, the game was heavily marketed as having an official Major League Baseball license, which implies real team names and real logos. But the devastating reality once you booted it up? LJN completely failed to secure a license from the Players Association. There were absolutely zero real player names in the game. You weren't playing as Jose Canseco, you were just a generic uniform number with completely outdated statistics. Clark realized instantly he had been defrauded.
Moving right along to Section 2, suing the gaming Goliath.
This is the part where a simple store return transforms into a massive federal dispute. When Clark went back to the store, they flat out refused to give him a refund. They had a super strict shrink-wrap policy. If it's open, you're stuck with it. The absolute best they offered was in exchange for the exact same game. But, plot twist, Clark's dad, Nick Thiemann, he was a practicing lawyer. He escalated the issue to Nintendo directly, pointing out the blatant misrepresentation. Nintendo's response? Absolute silence. Crickets. So Nick took matters into his own hands, and on January 16, 1990, he filed a federal class action lawsuit against Nintendo, LJN, and Major League Baseball.
All right, Section 3, the merits of the legal claim. Listen, you can't just sue a company because a toy is a letdown. You need to cite a specific violation of the law. The Thiemanns' entire lawsuit rested heavily on the Connecticut Unfair Trade Practices Act. Translating that into plain English for us, this state law explicitly prohibits any unfair and deceptive acts in commerce. And by filing this as a class action, the plaintiffs were making a huge statement. They were arguing, hey, this isn't just about Clark's $40, this is about protecting every single kid in the country who got tricked by this specific box art.
So what exact legal remedies were they demanding from what was basically the biggest entertainment company in the world at the time? Well, they went for the whole shebang. They wanted a court injunction to literally stop the sale of the current packaging. They demanded mandatory new, entirely honest packaging stating clearly that there were no real players. They asked for punitive damages, plus the coverage of their attorney fees. And finally, right down there at the bottom of the list, Clark just wanted his $40 refund.
Let's look at Section 4, the corporate defense strategy.
Now, while the mainstream media completely mocked this lawsuit, Nintendo's high-powered defense lawyers were not playing games. They fought back fiercely. On April 4th, 1990, Nintendo filed a motion to dismiss based on, quote, a failure to state a cause of action. What does that piece of legalese actually mean? Well, Nintendo was essentially standing up in federal court and shrugging. They were saying, so what? Even if every single claim this kid is making is 100% true, there's literally no law being broken here.
LJN's defense team backed this up with a ruthlessly literal argument. First off, they pointed to the game's development timeline. Sure, it was released in 1988, but the code was actually written in 1987. Therefore, they argued, those generic stats were perfectly accurate to the 1987 season when the code was locked in. Plus, they directly challenged the court to find one single sentence printed on that cardboard box that explicitly promised real player names. The box legally guaranteed team sizes, 9 guys on the field, but it never legally guaranteed who those specific players were. Crazy, right?
But the plaintiff's attorney, Lawrence Kanaga, fired back with what I consider a brilliant counterargument. He pointed directly to the back of the box, which explicitly promised that the player could simulate being a real baseball manager. Kanaga looked at the judge and asked, how on earth could a child possibly simulate being a manager if he couldn't even see the names of the players he was supposedly managing out there on the field? It was just a really powerful point highlighting the friction between reasonable consumer expectations and the hyper-literal text on the box.
Which brings us to Section 5, why the court dismissed the case.
The battle raged on in the U.S. District Court in New Haven until just a few days after Christmas, 1990. Judge Ellen Burns delivered her official ruling, and case dismissed. Yep, it was a sweeping, absolute victory for the Goliath corporate defense.
So the crucial point here, and as a lawyer this is the most painful part to digest, is the reasoning. The judge determined that while the packaging was undeniably frustrating for a kid who just wanted to play as his favorite athletes, it did not legally cross the threshold into deceptive trade practices under Connecticut law. It's that classic, frustrating friction between the ethical spirit of a law and the strict letter of the law. The plaintiffs did file an appeal, but the sheer financial burden of battling a corporate giant for years, it forced them to quietly withdraw. The Goliath literally starved them out.
And to put a bow on this whole thing, get this. Despite the massive high-profile lawsuit, the lack of real players, and the widely documented glitches, LJN's Major League Baseball still went on to sell over 1 million copies worldwide. Legally, they won the case, and financially, their questionable marketing tactics absolutely worked like a charm.
Finally, let's move to Section 6 and see how this builds into modern digital storefront standards.
Looking at this case today is mind-blowing because it shows just how drastically marketplace transparency has evolved since the Wild West of the 8-bit era. I mean, think about it. In 1989, your only information was that misleading box art. Today, before you spend a single dime, you can watch Twitch streams or YouTube reviews to see exactly what you're buying. Community feedback warns us almost instantly if a game fails to deliver, and most importantly, returns. If you broke a shrink wrap in 1989, you were totally out of luck. Today, major digital storefronts offer standard refund policies based on playtime, which protects you from exactly the kind of financial injury Clark suffered.
While the legal landscape has obviously improved leaps and bounds since Clark spent his hard-earned recycling money, this whole saga leaves us with a really important question to ponder. Do modern consumer protection laws truly do enough to protect gamers today? Or do our new digital marketplaces just present brand new, highly sophisticated legal loopholes for corporations to exploit? It is absolutely something to think about the next time you hit that purchase button. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, keep your guard up out there.